Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive?
Always.
Today we're tackling a theory that's pretty out there. The idea that our understanding of history, especially 19th century architecture, might be completely wrong.
Completely. What?
Yeah, I mean, like totally off, not just how those buildings were built, but what they were even used for.
Okay, I'm intrigued. What's our source this time?
We're diving into flat Earth transcription, the lost history of the flat Earth.
Interesting. I've heard bits and pieces about this one. What's the main focus?
Well, it claims that these ornate cathedrals and grand structures weren't just for show. They were part of a massive worldwide energy grid.
A global energy grid. Powered by what exactly?
Electromagnetism.
Electromagnetism. In the 1800s, that's a bold claim.
Right. But they connected to all these architectural features, domes, spires, even the symmetrical decorations, saying they weren't just aesthetic choices, they had a purpose in this energy grid.
I'm skeptical, but go on. How do they back this up?
Well, they start by showing all these photographs from the 19th century.
Yeah.
And the weird thing is, they show cities like Paris, London, covered in thick mud. Not just a little dirt, but serious mud everywhere.
Mud. Like a flood of mud.
Exactly. The source calls it the mud flood. They think it might be connected to soil liquefaction, which happens during earthquakes. The ground basically turns to quicksand.
Ah, right. Anything on it could sink. We saw that in Christchurch, remember? Those images were terrifying. Buildings tilted, cars half buried.
It's wild, isn't it? But here's the thing. In those old photos, the buildings themselves look mostly fine.
Yeah. You'd think if the liquefaction was that bad, there'd be more structural damage.
The source points that out, too. It's like this weird contrast, mud everywhere, but the buildings are practically untouched.
That discrepancy definitely raises some questions. So how does this tie back to the electromagnetic theory?
Okay, so they're saying that these structures, especially the cathedrals, were actually built to harness energy from the ionosphere. That's the layer way up in the atmosphere.
Harnessing energy from the ionosphere. With what technology?
That's where it gets a bit theoretical. They bring up the concept of ether, this substance that supposedly carries electromagnetic waves. It was a popular idea way back, but not really accepted by mainstream science anymore.
Ah, the ether. Okay, so they're saying these buildings were tapping into some kind of energy we don't even fully understand today.
Essentially, yeah. And they get really specific, like pointing to the domes and spires, acting like antennas, collecting energy from this ether.
And how did they supposedly control this energy? I mean, did they have switches and wires back then?
Okay, get this. They talk about cymatics. You know how sound waves can create those physical patterns?
Yeah, those videos where sand forms into shapes because of vibrations. Pretty cool stuff.
Right. Well, they're saying that these buildings were designed to use sound in a similar way to actually influence the ether and control the flow of energy.
Whoa. So these cathedrals were like giant musical instruments, generating sound waves to manipulate energy.
That's the idea. They even point to the placement of bells, the design of organ pipes, even the intricate carvings, suggesting they were all part of this sound technology.
I mean, it's mind-blowing to think something we see as purely decorative could have been part of such a sophisticated system. But if that's the case, what happened to all this technology? Where did it go?
That's one of the big questions the source raises. They propose this idea of a great reset, some global event that wiped out this advanced civilization and all its knowledge.
A great reset. Wow, that's a pretty big claim. Makes you wonder, who were these people that came before, and what else might we have lost from their time?
I know, right? It's like we're piecing together a puzzle, but with half the pieces missing. And the ones we do have fit together in ways we never expected.
This deep dive is already full of twists and turns. Where do we go from here?
Well, there's definitely more to uncover. Let's look at some specific examples, starting with the role of water in this supposed electromagnetic grid, because apparently it wasn't just for drinking and washing.
Yeah, the source really emphasizes water. They call it living waters, but they're not talking about like some magical spring or anything.
Okay, so what are they talking about?
They're suggesting that water itself could be infused with electromagnetic energy.
Infused.
That's where it gets a little fuzzy, but they think it might involve those sound frequencies we were discussing earlier. Maybe using sound to change the properties of water.
So like turning water into some kind of superpowered liquid? That's a pretty wild concept.
Yeah, it is. But They point to a lot of architectural evidence to support it. Think about all those elaborate canal systems, reservoirs, and fountains, especially around important buildings, like way more complex than they needed to be for just looks.
Right. They even show Chatsworth House in England as an example. It's got this crazy, intricate water system, cascades and jets everywhere. Way more than you'd need for just decoration.
Exactly. And the source argues that those features weren't just for aesthetics. They were functional parts of this electromagnetic grid, maybe helping to cool it down, regulate the energy flow, something like that.
Okay, let me get this straight. Buildings acting as antennas, water as a conductor, and sound is a way to control it all. It's like an entirely different kind of technology than we use today. But where does alchemy fit into all of this?
Well, the source suggests that this tech might have been influenced by alchemy. They talk about mercury, for example, and its unique properties.
Alchemy, like turning lead into gold. I thought that was just a myth.
Well, the source presents it as a sophisticated system of knowledge about the nature of energy and matter. And they suggest that mercury, because it's so conductive and can form amalgams, might have been crucial in this lost technology.
Interesting. They even mention those old lighthouses that used rotating lenses powered by mercury, right?
Right. And they think mercury might have been used in a similar way to manipulate electromagnetic energy in this ancient grid.
This is blowing my mind. It's like trying to imagine a smartphone designed by alchemists hundreds of years ago. But how do the symbols we see in architecture fit into all of this? They mention lions, eagles, griffins, those creatures that show up everywhere.
Yeah, they do. And they believe those symbols might have held specific meanings related to this lost knowledge, like connecting lions to gold and eagles to mercury, tying it back to alchemy.
And then there's the swastika, a symbol that's obviously controversial today, but the source says it's been totally misunderstood.
Yeah, the source points out that the swastika was originally a positive symbol in many cultures, representing things like the sun, life, good luck. They argue that it was actually meant to represent a vortex, a swirling energy pattern, not hate.
And they connect it to those theories about the North Pole being a central vortex in this global energy grid.
Exactly. They suggest that the real meaning of the swastika was deliberately suppressed because it held clues to this lost knowledge that certain powerful people didn't want us to remember.
Okay, this is getting pretty deep. Hidden meanings, suppressed knowledge, a global energy grid powered by water and sound, and symbols connecting it all. It's like uncovering a secret history hidden in plain sight.
Yeah.
But there's one more piece to this puzzle, right? The moon map, as the source calls it. What is that all about?
The moon map. That's where things get, well, even more interesting.
Okay, lay it on me. What is this moon map?
So the source tells the story about a guy named George Sturgios. He spent years meticulously mapping out the land masses you can see on the moon's surface.
Hold on, mapping the land masses on the moon. Like continents and stuff. I'm lost.
Exactly. Continents, just like here on Earth. And the crazy part is, the patterns he mapped out on the moon were incredibly similar to the continents on Earth.
Wait, what? A map of Earth on the moon. How is that even possible?
Right. It completely challenges everything we think we know about the moon. The source actually suggests that the moon might not even be a solid object.
If it's not solid, then what is it? Geez.
Not quite. They propose it's more like a plasma phenomenon, a projection of light and energy.
A plasma projection. Like
Yeah.
some kind of giant hologram. Now we're really getting out there.
I know, it sounds crazy. But the source uses this to explain things like the moon's cold light, its semi-transparency, and the fact we only ever see one side. They argue these characteristics don't really fit with the traditional solid moon theory.
Okay, I kind of see where they're going with this. But what about the craters on the moon? Are those not real either?
Well, the source analyzes these craters, especially that big one right in the center, and they think it might actually be a reflection of the firmament.
The firmament. Isn't that like a biblical term for the sky?
Yeah, you're right. But the source is using it more metaphorically. They're talking about an energetic boundary, a kind of barrier surrounding our realm.
So let me get this straight. They're saying the moon is a plasma projection showing us a map of Earth. And it also shows reflections of this firmament. It's like something out of a science fiction movie.
It might sound like fiction, but the source lays out their reasoning pretty clearly. They say the image on the moon is a composite, combining a map of the Earth with an image of the firmament itself.
So we can actually see the structure of the universe reflected on the moon. My head's spinning.
It's definitely a lot to take in. The source is really challenging us to rethink everything we thought we knew, not just about the moon, but about history and the very nature of our reality.
This is a lot to process. We've gone from muddy streets to a worldwide energy grid, from alchemical symbols to a map of the universe on the moon. And of course, there's the Great Reset the source keeps mentioning. What exactly do they think happened?
Well, they're suggesting something major happened, a cataclysmic event, maybe even deliberate, that wiped out this advanced civilization. They're connecting it back to those photos of muddy streets and empty cities.
Yeah, the source mentioned something about a depopulation event. That's a pretty dark thought.
It is. They don't get into specifics about what caused this reset, but they say it's why we don't see more obvious evidence of this advanced technology today.
They even tie it to all those orphans in the 19th century, right?
Exactly. The source proposes the Great Reset led to a massive loss of life, and those orphans were part of a deliberate repopulation effort. It's definitely a chilling theory.
But if this reset really happened, wouldn't we find more evidence? Like ruins or artifacts or something?
That's a good question. The source addresses this by suggesting the evidence is hidden in plain sight. They argue that the architecture itself, the cathedrals, the arches, those complex water systems, it all points to this technology that we've simply forgotten how to recognize.
So we're surrounded by evidence of this lost civilization, but we just don't see it because we don't have the knowledge to understand it.
That's the idea. It's like we lost the instruction manual and we're left trying to figure out this ancient technology just by looking at the finished product.
It's like trying to rebuild a computer just by looking at the outside. We might be able to guess at some things, but we wouldn't really know how it works.
Exactly. And the source goes even further, suggesting this lack of understanding isn't accidental. They think this knowledge was deliberately suppressed, maybe by those who wanted to control history and keep this power for themselves.
So we're not just talking about a lost civilization. We're talking about a potential cover-up, an intentional effort to erase this knowledge.
That's what they're implying. It makes you wonder who might be benefiting from keeping this hidden.
This whole thing is like a conspiracy theory, but with actual evidence woven into the architecture. It's hard to just dismiss it.
I agree. And the source encourages us to do our own research, look at the evidence with a fresh perspective and consider that what we've been told about history might not be the whole story.
This deep dive has definitely given me a lot to think about. It's overwhelming, but in a good way. But where do we go from here? What are we supposed to do with this information?
Well, I think awareness is the first step. Recognizing that there might be more to our history than we've been taught, and being open to exploring alternative explanations.
So it's not about blindly accepting everything the source says, but using it as a jumping-off point for our own investigation.
Exactly. Look at the world with fresh eyes. Question everything and be curious. You never know what hidden connections you might find.
It's like we've been given a new lens to see the world through, one that reveals a whole hidden layer of meaning and possibilities.
And that's a powerful thing. Once you start seeing things through that lens, it's hard to go back.
Well, folks, that's another deep dive in the books. We've gone from muddy streets to a worldwide energy grid, from alchemical symbols to a map on the moon, and even a potential great reset that reshaped our world. It's a lot to take in.
It is. But it reminds us that the world is full of mysteries and the quest for knowledge never truly ends.
And that's a perfect note to end on. Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep an open mind. Who knows what you might discover hidden in plain sight? Until next time, happy digging.